Hi there, Dave Markham here for UU A Way of Life. This is our fourth session of Tuesday night class. I'm glad to see you again. I'm glad to be doing this again. The first session, we talked about the idea of what is a person. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism says that we covenant together to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. As we try to examine this principle, one of the basic questions is, what is the person that the principle is referring to? And in the first class, we talked about the idea of a person is really a social construction, that without language, we would have no sense of ourselves or our world. We wouldn't have names for things. And we play multiple social roles. So I'm a son, a parent, a grandparent, a brother, a husband, a friend, a citizen, a psychotherapist in my life. I do many things, and obviously in each role that I find myself enacting and participating in, I experience myself in a little different way, and I'm also perceived in a different way by other people. So the idea of a person is quite flexible and fluid. So one of the things we need to consider when we talk about the inherent worth and dignity of every person is, what is this person that's being referred to? This gets us to our second class, where we talked about who are the people that you don't like, that you don't think have worth and dignity, that in our society are stigmatized. Do they have worth and dignity? Does Adolf Hitler, does a sex offender, does a serial killer have inherent worth and dignity? Jesus says we have to love our enemies. That's a very hard thing to do. And Jesus, I believe, statement is based on the idea that we all are children of God, and because of that creation and inheritance, we have a divine spark in each one of us, even though we get caught up in all the drama of the ego playing. If you appreciate this idea to some extent, then we're called to, in a non-judgmental way, love our enemies and people we don't like and whose behavior we don't approve of. And very often those people get treated with less worth and dignity than others. The third class, we talked about, again, this idea of what a person is. And we discussed Gregory Bateson's idea that the person is a unit of survival. It's the organism and the environment, and you can't separate the two. The organism would not exist without the environment, and the environment would not be the same without the organism. So we are, when we are humble enough to admit it, utterly dependent on our parents and the people around us for our daily bread, and even the oxygen that we breathe and the water and rain that we need to live. And we ended the last class with Reverend Galen Guenrich's idea of utter dependence, that we're utterly dependent on the interdependent web of existence. So the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, really does not have a lot of meaning unless we consider it in the context of the seventh principle, which is that we are part of the interdependent web of all existence. That leaves us, I think, becoming aware of our utter dependence and the way we probably best experience that is with a degree of humility, uh, you know, because if it wasn't for everybody else and my benefiting from their efforts, I would not be enjoying the quality of life that I experience today. And that leads then to gratitude. So the two hallmarks of uh, the awareness that the unit of survival is the organism in the environment, and we're utterly dependent on that environment, leads us then to humility and gratitude. Before I go on with the subject for tonight's class, I just want to thank the people who have written articles this week: Susan Schmidt, Steve Daly, Barry Walker, Barb McMullen, Chris O'Connor, Glenn Daniels, and today Jack Turner. So if you haven't read those articles, I recommend them to you. And by all means, leave a comment about what you think. These authors have taken the time to try to respond in some way to the ideas that we have been discussing here in the Tuesday night class. So take a look at that stuff. Email them to your friends and family. If you have your own small group ministry, maybe you want to discuss some of this material in your small group. And I appreciate any feedback that you have. Leave it in the comments after the articles, or email it to me, davidgmarkham@gmail.com. All right, tonight we're going to talk about the original blessing or original sin. As a former Roman Catholic, I was brought up with the idea that we were all born with original sin. I remember the nuns teaching us this in catechism class and religious education. And until we get baptized and that defect is washed away, we can't go to heaven. And even though the Catholic Church now has kind of done away with this idea of limbo, the old idea that I was taught back in the 50s was that if you had an unbaptized baby, that baby, if they died with still the mark of original sin on their soul, they couldn't go to heaven. They were going to limbo. So that is a very deep, long-term belief in Christianity. It comes from Martin Luther, or I'm sorry, from St. Augustine. And, of course, this whole idea of Jesus dying on the cross as a way of atoning for our sins, if nothing more than the original sin was necessary for us to be able to go to heaven. Fox, the Dominican priest, I'm trying to remember his first name. At any rate, he was the developer of what's called creation spirituality, Matthew. And Matthew Fox did kind of a play on words and said that people were not born with original sin, but born with the original blessing. And God bless Matthew Fox. He got excommunicated from the Catholic Church, so now he's an Anglican priest. He was too far out there, I guess, for the Curia and the Vatican, but nonetheless, I think that his reframing or thinking about this idea in a different way has been very profound. Reverend Marlon Lavenhar in the All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, preached a wonderful sermon a few months ago about the original lie. And he goes on about this whole idea that obviously it was good for the church, you get people come to church and get their kids baptized because the parents are terrified the kid's going to go to hell if they don't get baptized, and then they get sucked into all the services of the priestly class and contribute to the church, because if they don't participate in the sacraments, they are barred from salvation. And of course, Martin Luther railed against all that, the idea of selling indulgences and that kind of thing. So the Protestant Reformation was born, but all that nonsense was was based on this idea that people are born defective. I was reading Kenneth Collier. He's a Unitarian Universalist minister. In the book, he has a little book on the 7 principles, story and verse. And Reverend Collier says a few things. Let me just quote this. I thought it was pretty good. It's easier for me and probably clearer for me to read what Reverend Collier said than to try to paraphrase it. Here's what he said, quote, "As far as I can tell, I cannot recognize the worth and dignity within myself unless I recognize it everywhere I may look, even in people within whom it is dark and hidden, rejected, and forgotten. As far as I fail to recognize profound beauty in another, I fail to see it clearly in myself. As far as I deny it in another, I deny it in myself. The extent to which I affirm it wherever I look, for, as every religious genius who has ever lived has affirmed, the center of the universe is everywhere, not least in the hearts of every human being." That's on page 19 in his book, Our 7 Principles in Story and Verse. Profound beauty, Reverend Collier calls it, not original sin. And then let me quote what I wrote in my book here on the 16 Reflections on the First Principle. Having been conditioned in a religion, Roman Catholicism, where I was taught that I was born defective, inadequate, and corrupt because of original sin, I never thought I was good enough, even when supposedly this original defect was fixed by baptism. I was taught that my children had to be baptized as infants so that their original sin could be washed away, and if they died, could now go to heaven, but if not, would go to limbo. These teachings might be considered part of what Reverend Marlon Lavenhar, pastor of All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, calls the original lie. So here's some questions to consider. What do you think? Were you born with original sin or with the original blessing? Your views of that may have changed over time. As I have mentioned, I was taught I was born with original sin. And up until I ran into Matthew Fox, I felt my path to salvation involved working very hard to expunge that defect from my soul. Even though I had benefit from the sacraments, still, I was inherently a bad person who had to avoid the near occasion of sin, or I'd go to hell. It's not until I got to Unitarian Universalism that I realized, I don't think that's true. I think I and everybody else have inherent worth and dignity. And once you realize that, it puts you in conflict with the major totalizing narrative of the last 2,000 years. And so sometimes people say, well, gee, I never heard of Unitarian Universalism. That must be a very small denomination. It is. It's got about 1,000 people, or 100,000 people in the United States. Well, why would that be? Because we're pretty darn countercultural. We don't adhere to the major narrative, theological narrative of Christianity in the United States. As Jesus said, many are called, few are chosen. And I don't believe myself that Jesus ever taught anything about original sin. You know, he said repeatedly to his disciples, if you only knew how much your Father in heaven loved you. He not only loves you, he loves you abundantly. So the church had a vested interest in thinking that we needed the church in order to have access to God's blessing and grace and the kingdom. It just isn't true. And Unitarian Universalists have learned that and have recognized that there is something about each one of us, every human being, that has inherent worth and dignity because we are an extension of God's love for God's creation. All right? So, have a good week. I hope it's a blessed one. And do something special for yourself this week because you deserve it, right? And if you love yourself, then you have something good to share with other people. I'll see you next week. God bless you.